Good afternoon, fourth grade. We are going to continue reading in our text about the American Revolution. And today we are going to focus on the two leaders, King George III and George Washington. But before we get started, we have a quick write that says, do you think Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton would be a better leader for our country? Why? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. Our focus question for today is, how were the opposing leaders of the American Revolution similar and how were they different? So we are going to be comparing and contrasting the two leaders. Our vocabulary for today is petition. That's when you request someone to do something. Typically, you're asking the government to do something or to change something, and you get people to sign your petition. So that would be this picture. The second is republic. That's a state in which the supreme power, or the people have the power. The king doesn't have the power. The people elect representatives, and they have a power. So in the United States, we have a republic. We elect our representatives by voting. And so that would be this picture. And then number 3 is, it would be this picture, republic, this picture. And then these are pictures of presidents that were elected by the people. And number 3 is allegiance. That's loyalty to an individual or a group or a cause. And these children are pledging allegiance to the United States. All right, turn the page in your notes, and you need to make sure you have your text out on your desk so that it matches the screen here. And as we're reading, remember, this is our nonfiction text. So we're going to use our strategy to find the main idea. And anytime you're reading a nonfiction text, you want to make sure that you are able to know the main idea by the end. And so we're going to start by asking a how or why question about the title. And the title is Opposing Leaders. So my question is, in box 1, write this down. How does the author describe the leaders of the American Revolution? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to read. All right, and so I'm at the beginning of the text. And remember, we're going to underline our answer to the question, how does the author describe the leaders of the American Revolution? With King George III's support, Prime Minister Lord North led the government's military efforts to bring the colonies under control. Some British statesmen and generals, however, believed the armed conflict would be a disaster for the empire. George Washington from Virginia was chosen to be Commander-in-Chief of the armies of Congress. New England patriots John Adams, a political theorist, and John Hancock, a wealthy merchant, were among the first delegates to the Continental Congress. Along with Adams, legal expert John Jay from New York later traveled to France to represent America in international affairs. So we'll stop right there. We have some information about how the author describes the leaders, and he talks about how King George III is the leader of Great Britain, and he appointed Prime Minister Lord North to lead the army, and George Washington was chosen to be Commander-in-Chief of the American colonist forces. And so this lets us know that if these men were chosen, if George Washington was chosen by a group of people to be the leader, he must be very respected. And King George III was already the king, so he must be respected as well. And so for our main idea, we would write down King George III was the leader of Great Britain, and George Washington was the leader of the American colonists. Both men were respected by their armies. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. 2A says, how did King George III view the American colonists? And if we go back into our text, it says that King George III chose Prime Minister Lord North to lead the government military's efforts to bring the colonies under control. So that lets us know King George III thinks the American colonists are out of control if he wants to control them. So in 2A, we would write King George III thought the colonists needed to be controlled. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2B. And it says, what does this reveal about King George III? And this lets us know that that we could say he's controlling because he wants to control the American colonists. We could also say that he's very strict. He's a strict ruler. So in 2B, you could write, this reveals that King George III is a strict ruler. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3A. 3A says, why did some British statesmen and generals disagree with King George III? Let's go back in our text. It says, some British statesmen and generals, however, believed armed conflict would be a disaster for the empire. So they disagreed with King George III because they thought a war with the American colonists in North America would actually be a disaster for the entire British Empire. So in box 3A, you would write, the British statesmen and generals disagreed with King George III because they thought a conflict with the American colonists would be a disaster for the empire. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3B. Watch a video and we're going to answer this question for 3B. Why did the colonists form the Continental Congress?
I would read into the record, for the benefit of those delegates who were unable to remain to close the session, the declarations and resolves of this first Congress. Resolve that to the recent grievous acts imposed by Parliament on Massachusetts, we cannot submit, but in hopes that our fellow subjects in Great Britain will restore to us happiness and prosperity, rather than support the Massachusetts militia, we have agreed to pursue the following peaceable measures. To publish a statement of the aforesaid to the inhabitants of British America.
I need no reminders.
2. To enter into a non-importation, non-consumption, and non-exportation agreement of British goods.
No one will honor.
And 3. To prepare a loyal address to His Majesty.
Which His Majesty will not read.
This Congress stands adjourned.
Business of this Congress being concluded, all delegates are respectfully reminded.
The business of this Congress has been to achieve nothing.
Year of our Lord, 1775.
You carry good news back home, Mr. Payne. Massachusetts has made its cause plain to its sister colonies, and now it will be made plain to Parliament.
I beg to differ, Mr. Dickinson. Nothing has been made plain. All this Congress has shown is that every man in it thinks that he is a great man. Orator, a critic, a statesman, and therefore every man must show his oratory, his criticism, his political ability.
Okay, we'll stop right there because we have some information about why they formed the Continental Congress. And if you were listening when they were talking to each other, the Congress, a group of men from all the states got together and met, and they were telling like what they had agreed on in the Continental Congress, that they weren't going to go to war yet, but instead they were going to determine how to peacefully settle their disagreement with Great Britain. So, and they talked about boycotting, and they talked about refusing to buy the British goods, writing King George III a letter, things like that. So in 2B, you would write down the Continental Congress met to determine how to peacefully settle their disagreements with Great Britain. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4A. And 4A says, based on what you already know about George Washington and the French and Indian War, why was he, meaning George Washington, chosen to lead the armies of Congress? Okay, and so we remember George Washington from the French and Indian War and how he was the youngest American-born person to lead part of the army. And so he had already been really successful in the French and Indian War. And so in 4A, we would write, George Washington was chosen to lead the armies of Congress because he proved to be a good military leader in the French and Indian War. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 4B. It says, based on the evidence in the text, how do both leaders expect to settle the conflict between the American colonists and Great Britain? And if we go back in our text, it lets us know that they are both preparing their militaries. And so if both sides are getting their militaries ready, that lets us know that they expect to go to war. So in 4B, we would write down both leaders expect that there will be a war because they are both forming armies. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. It says, what qualities do the opposing leaders have? How do you know?